morning. The time is now 3 after 9. We have quorum present, and I call this meeting to order.
You're not on, I don't think.
I don't control that. So go ahead and stand and join me in the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Okay. Open comment period.
Public comment.
We have Mr. Chris Taylor and Mr. Scott White for public comment.
Okay.
Oh, Scott White is for items 3 and 5.
Oh, okay. So we do have someone. Oh, sorry.
You'll be allowed 3 minutes.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Chris Taylor with Rexel Coating Corporation here in El Paso, Texas, local company. In 2005, Austin, Texas banned the use of coal tar asphaltic emulsions. In 2017, San Antonio followed suit and banned the use of coal tar asphaltic emulsions. And since then, we've been trying to develop a environmentally safe asphalt sealer that allows asphalt to be maintained the way it should be. And we've come up with an innovative product that is environmentally safe and is PAW-free, which is photocyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and other harmful surfactants. And we've eliminated these from our polymers and provided a environmentally safe sealant that, when applied, will last for years. We weren't happy with that. We're trying to become LEED certified, and we've taken it a step further by adding infrared reflective pigment to our sealer that reduces the heat island effect. And we've come out with a new product that we feel will be very environmentally safe and also address the heat island effect. And I have flyers in the back if you'd like to take a look at one. We do free demonstrations, and we'd like to prove to y'all that we can environmentally safely protect our environment and the asphalt at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other,
No additional.
just on specific items? Okay, can we move to item 1, please?
I'm sorry. Mr. Scott White does want to speak.
Oh, okay.
It was called public 3 and 5.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Good morning, members of the MPO guests. Once again, I stand here thanking you for the active transportation system, but I'm also asking, when are we actually going to see the effects? We see a lot of great projects out there that are doing things to help improve congestion, air quality mitigation, but we also need to be looking at the people who are trying to get around outside of cars. We've got a great deal of area that has to be covered, and with our land use patterns, as we continue to build roads for cars primarily, even though the AASHTO Green Book really does call out the need to include people who walk, people who bike, people who take transit, we're focusing on a car-centric approach on a lot of projects. So today I'm glad to see there's a lot of projects that are focusing on active transportation. But we really do need to go further. And a couple years ago, when Mayor Leeser was chair of the board, I challenged him then, let's put together a comprehensive vision for this entire region rather than ad hoc a bunch of different projects, so that we can work across the region, not just each individual municipality or each individual agency. Let's work across the entire region to make sure all modes are built into our planning. This is a challenge I put to you here today. Let's focus on people, not just vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Do we have any others signed up for call to public?
No additional.
Okay. Go ahead and move to item number 1.
Item number 1 is discussion and action to approve the motions and minutes for the December 15, 2017 Transportation Policy Board meeting.
A motion from Representative Gonzalez. Second from Representative No. All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Item 2.
Item number 2 is discussion and action to request to extend the MPO attorney Scott P. Foster's agreement for an additional 6 months.
Okay, do we have any discussion? Okay, a motion to approve? Second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Move to item 3, please.
Item number 3 is discussion and action to amend the Horizon 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Horizon 2017-2020 Transportation Improvement Program to program County of El Paso statewide transportation alternatives set-aside project in fiscal year 2019, off-road shared use path along O.T. Smith Road that extends from Alameda Avenue to the I-10 intersection, a distance of approximately 2.45 miles for $2,143,913 under the Texas Department of Transportation Minute Order 115076, awarded on October 26, 2017.
Good morning, board members. Blanca Serrano, TESA coordinator for the El Paso District. In January of last year, the Department of Transportation opened a call for projects, a statewide call for projects. In October of this year, there was a total of $25 million worth of projects awarded statewide. Amongst those is this project here before you right now. We're asking for your approval to amend the TIP and include this project in that so they can go into the February revisions. Any questions?
I have a motion to approve from Representative No, second from Mr. Marcus. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining?
We do
Motion-
have public comment on
Oh, we do
item
have
number
public
3.
comment. I apologize. Or reverse
Mr.
course.
Scott White?
Good morning again, members of the board. This is a wonderful project that's before you. I hope you pass this, but I hope you also look at the material that's being used. They're talking about reinforced concrete. When it comes to active transportation, people who walk, people who bike, concrete is very hard on the feet. If you're going to put something in, it's better to put something that's softer, that's more comfortable, that increases the level of comfort for the users. Concrete may be more durable and last longer in the long run, but if you want people to use it, it has to be comfortable. There are really 4 questions people ask if they choose to engage in mode share. First, is it legal? Second, is it safe? Third, is it pleasant or comfortable? Fourth, is it advantageous? If you want people to get out of their cars, to engage in active transportation, you have to make it pleasant and comfortable. So if this project does go forward, I hope some consideration is made. Consider using a different material, use asphalt, so it's safer, more comfortable for the users in the long run, so that it's a more pleasant experience for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. I'll go ahead and call the vote on that. We did have a motion in a second. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Item 4.
Item number 4 is discussion and action to amend the Horizon 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Horizon 2017-2020 Transportation Improvement Program for fiscal year 2019 to adjust the cost of the Interstate 10 Connect project by reducing Category 43C funds from $54,649,045 to $42,830,869, adding $10 million in Category 11 Rider B funds, adding an additional $7,600,000 in Category 12 Strategic Priority, making the new total $90,416,143.
May I? Somebody a question? Just
Who's presenting on with?
This item is presented by TxDOT.
Mr. Vila, can I ask you, Mr. Vila? It's just a why? I know that's complicated with funds. We're reducing from 54 million to 42, adding 10, so that's kind of a wash. But why is it Category 11? And additional funds, I'm not so concerned, just What's the reason?
Well, it ends up being the same amount of money. It's just that we were moving money around from project to project to try to make sure a bunch of projects were funded.
Let me reiterate, why?
You want to get to the details?
Sure. Eddie Voltaire, Texas Department of Transportation, Director of Transportation Planning and Development. So on this project here, initial allocations were given for Cat 4. They were then reduced after the actual UTP came out. So that's the reduction in the Cat 4. At about the same time, the allocations for Cat 11, which is the Rider 11B, which is used as kind of like CBI money for the border areas. So this project fit in really well, and we were able to replenish what was reduced. And then the $7 million is from the Delta project.
So does that mean the 3C funds, that reduction of 10 million plus can be used somewhere else, that category of money can be?
No,
used?
we were actually reduced in allocation
Oh, okay.
for the actual
Okay,
allocation.
now,
right.
okay. So
So-
the allocation was
Yeah,
reduced.
the original allocation was reduced.
So we
Right.
had to come up with another 10 million.
Right, and the 11B just fit perfectly right in there. So.
So this 10 million is the, Mr. Bielik, as I understood it, I think some discussion that we had a while back after the last session is from that border funding that we got, where we split funds between our district, the Lower Valley District, and the Laredo District. Is that right? So-
Right, the FAR district, the Laredo district, and the El Paso district get funds out of Rider 11B.
So that's these 10,000 million that we're talking about.
Correct.
And the reduction, why was there a reduction made?
Well,
on
the reduction was the commission made an initial allocation of the connectivity funds, that's the Category 4 funds. The original, it was reduced, what? Ours was reduced $10 million. So that's why we had to find another $10 million in order to get the I-10 Connect project funded.
But you know what it sounds like to me? It sounds, or appears, that we had 10 million in that fund, and because we got that additional border funding, now we reduce the fund and supplant it with the 10 million. Seems like we're,
So
okay, maybe that's what Chairman Pickett is getting at, that it seems like
This was a
we're losing
statewide-
out on some money here.
The reallocation was statewide.
Right.
So all districts lost funds. They were reallocated after looking at the numbers again at the statewide level. They sent out a new allocation to every district, and every district was reduced.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Representative Blanco.
How does this affect the timeline for the project?
It does not.
It doesn't.
It doesn't?
And we still expect to.
Unless you vote no.
Well, that's true. If you vote no, it dies, but I think we're still aiming for September.
We're still
At least
aiming for
first
September.
quarter.
We still have some federal
fiscal year
process to go through, so, we always say be cautious with that, but we are on the plans, on target, on everything else we're on target. We do have air quality that we have to go with Federal Highway and the consultative partners on.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Thank you very much.
Move to approve.
I have a motion to approve. I have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries.
Next, we have discussion and action to approve the recommendations from the Transportation Project Advisory Committee. Item number 5, A through E, so I will read those accordingly. Amend the Horizon 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Horizon 2017-2020 Transportation Improvement Program for A, University Avenue Pedestrian Enhancement Phase 3, MPO ID number E108X-3, to use $453,306, which is 80%, 20% local match, of Transportation Alternative Program set-aside funding and $1,029,608 of local contribution for a total construction cost of $1,482,914 in fiscal year 2018. This project ranked highest in the TPB approved TAP project list sponsored by UTEP. Item number B is Tiwa Boulevard Preliminary Engineering, MPO ID number P512X-15A-PE, to use $3,670,000, which is 80% federal, 20% local match, of Surface Transportation Program Metropolitan Mobility, which is funding, and $1,887,882 of local contribution for total PE cost of $5,557,882 in fiscal year 2018. This project is eligible under the MPO STP-MMPE policy, and it's sponsored by the City of Socorro. Item number C is Zaragoza Port of Entry, Pan American Wind Road, CSJ number 092406418, MPO ID number A524X, CAP-2, to use $953,550, which is 80% federal, 20% local match, of STP-MM funding for a total construction cost of $13,096,169 in fiscal year 2018. This project is eligible under the MPO's year-end funds policy, sponsor City of El Paso. Item number D, Central Business District CBD4 PE, MPO ID number R307D-PE-2, to use $1,578,385, which is 80% federal, 20% local match, of STP-MM funding in fiscal year 2018. This project is eligible under the MPO's year-end funds policy and sponsored by City of El Paso. And item number E, Streetcar Operating Assistant Phase 1, CSJ number 092406-552, MPO ID number T108X-1, to use $2,174,640 of 80% federal, 20% local match of congestion mitigation and air quality funding in fiscal year 2018. This project is eligible under the MPO's year-end funds policy, and it's sponsored by Sun Metro.
Okay.
Good morning.
Just
Greg McNichol, Chair of the TPAC.
Thank you.
A couple things here. We may want to look at the items one at a time. I'll just pass that on. I'm going to talk a little bit more about A for you because that's directly related to UTEP. I know there were questions by the board in December about this one.
Yeah, let's kind of, in fact, let's start there. Refresh everybody about what we're discussing. This is something that received a lot of discussion at the last meeting, and when we left here last, there was well, you can go over the fund balances reconciliation, kind of give us a brief overview of why we are where we are, and then the work that's been done over the last 5 weeks at TPEC to bring us to this agenda item.
Sure, as it relates to A, okay?
Sure.
First off, this is a project that is really a six block segments. Two of the projects, there's actually 3 different projects associated with this work now, if you will, assuming this one gets approved. Right now, City of El Paso is working on a 2-block segment between Stanton Street and Oregon, and this helps tie the campus back to the streetcar and to the bike lanes that have been installed along Stanton Street. And then UTEP is already working on, and it'll be in this fiscal year too, a 2-block section that goes from the campus towards Oregon Street, but doesn't get all the way there, okay? And so we're trying to, again, pedestrian improvements, bike lanes. This helps tie us back to the express routes that Sun Metro has coming from the Mission Valley of El Paso and from the facility out off of Montana, okay? And those are heavily used, and we're just trying to, again, address public safety. This section, if it gets approved, would then complete that work so that 6-block run is 100% finished. And that's why we're asking for the funds. It's important enough to UTEP that, yes, we increased our local contribution to make sure we could cover it. And just at the end of the day, that's what we're asking for here. I did ask for consideration in the letter that if there was Category 12 money available to put to that cause, it would be appreciated, but it's not required. I want to make that real clear to everybody. We UTEP think it's important enough that we're ready to go forward with it with TAP money that is available.
Okay. So do we have any questions in particular on this?
We're going to take them one at a time.
I think we're going to walk through them one at a time.
But,
And then vote all at once, or is that what you want to do?
I don't think that we've come to that conclusion yet.
Okay.
I think you want to present them and then answer any questions on each specific.
Okay, on the next items, at the board meeting, and I know there's gonna be a lot of discussion on this probably coming here, that there is an agenda deadline related to every month to get agenda items out there. And in the course of reviewing the rest of the free balance money, there were several projects that I don't want to say came in late, but they were after the deadline to post the agenda. And that is published, it's in your packet right now too, as it relates to the TPB. We took a conservative, we, the board, not the board, excuse me, the committee, took a conservative view at it, saying, because we're trying to be fair. At the end of the day, we're trying to be really fair to everybody. And if it didn't make that agenda deadline, then do we consider it or not? And we did discuss that. And the overwhelming consensus around the table was that, on the conservative side, that we're not going to review items that didn't show up by the agenda deadline on that for the January meeting. Okay, whether that was the position we took. We recognize that, again, we're trying to follow policy and procedures that have been laid out to us on how to operate, and we realize that y'all have the authority that we don't to override something like that. Okay, so, and that's where we came from. Okay, again, just trying to be, as a group, very fair with this.
Okay. Did you want to go through the other?
You know, some of that I may need some help, to be honest with you, on some
Okay.
of these others.
We can do that.
If you've got more questions related to, because there may be individual questions related to each of these. I know that item B, for example, is a City of Socorro component, and I know that they're related to doing some preliminary engineering with money that has been purposely set aside for some of the smaller entities within the county to accomplish work like this. And that's where they came forward and asked for this item. Renee can speak to this more in detail if you need questions from Renee.
Do we even? No? Okay.
Okay. Item C, again,
Oh, I'm
is
sorry. Yes, sir.
I just want to add that there was some funding that we went after. We did put our documents on time. I know that we had a big discussion whether or not to, what was said prior was we were going to accept the people's projects if they were after the due date. I think it is very unfair. That's why we have policies and procedures. I said it there and I'll say it here. You know, we shouldn't consider these, some of these projects because they don't meet the deadline. I mean, why is it that we have policies and procedures and then nobody makes them, you know, on time? There's good projects. Mine, this is a good project because it's not only gonna, you know, be beneficial for the city of Socorro, but also for San Elizario, also for the Tigua area. It's gonna connect the border East Highway to I-10. So it's not only just for the city of Socorro, but it's for the whole region. And I think that's what this board is for, is to help, you know, the region. You know, we do have funding in our fund balance that we could use for the 20%. So that's why we went ahead and asked for this money. And we're ready to go, basically.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have any questions on this? On B? No?
Any questions related to Z, related to Saragossa Port of Entry? This is a City of El Paso project. Again, I'll ask for assistance from the City of El Paso if you've got questions.
Did we have any discussion on that particular item? No? Okay, please
Okay,
continue.
moving on then to item D, the Central Business District Phase 4 project. Again, this is a City of El Paso project. And I would, again, ask for assistance from the City of El Paso on answering any questions you might have.
And then,
Just a couple, what's the construction cost? Because this is P&E.
Marwan with the City of El Paso. I'm sorry, what was the question?
Just what's the construction cost, Omar?
The construction cost for
On-
which,
This is CDB Four?
Right now, we have it around $13 million.
About 13 million? And these have been around for, I think, ever since Pickett was on city council, which was 25 years ago.
For a
What-
while.
Really, I'm serious, where are we in all this? Because during my time, we had done some improvements, and then they actually went to waste. We did all these nice improvements, and then we tore down buildings and tore down streets. Have we coordinated with all the stuff that's going on downtown and pretty secure?
And
on
maybe
where
Ted
we
could
are?
answer that question.
The answer is yes. This is in coordination with the Border Highway West, with the streetcar improvements that are going on in the area, with Paseo de las Luces that is about to start. This,
About to start, is that, because Paseo de las Luces has been around for a while, is that?
this is a brand-new project that the city of El Paso created for Paseo de las Luces and just got approved. It will be completed this year. So we are coordinating everything. Remember that the downtown area, because of the Border Highway West, is undergoing some changes. You know, the connectivity to the Border Highway West is changing. You know, the routes that we are having to use today are the one-way streets that connect all the way to Border Highway. Some of them will be closed, some of them will be converted to two-way. So this money helps us, you know, match what TxDOT is doing and continue all the way to Paisano. So that we have to change the character of the area from being a thoroughfare, so now it will become more residential.
And because of all the changes and improvements, Border Highway West, did we have P&E on CDB 4 sometime in the past?
We did, and we have been adjusting it because of all the changes. For example, Kansas, Campbell will have to go to two-way because some of them are closed. There is no longer a connectivity to the Border Highway West. So because we have a school at the end, we have to change some of the circulation in the area. We have to add, you know, school flashers, and TxDOT is doing a portion of that, you know, up to the second block. And then we need to continue the rest, go all the way to Paisano.
And since we've spent money in the past and then didn't do the construction, do you feel confident that this will get done? Because I think the notes say construction is 2020.
Yes, sir.
So the PE is 2018. You think there won't be any other changes in there, and you should be able to actually go on with construction?
Because the streetcar is already, alignment is already in place, because the Border Highway will have completed most of the closures, because we are, you know, our counts and our new connectivity through Paisano to Border Highway will be, you know, will be completed by then. And the new circulation patterns will be in place. Yes, we're confident that
And
we
the
can do it.
city has their match
Yes, sir.
for the 13 million come 2020? We
Yes, sir.
won't be postponing?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I do have something to say on this, but I'm gonna, with your indulgence, I'm gonna wait to the end and address all of them at once.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
The last item in the packet for consideration is the streetcar operating assistance, Phase 1. This is one I will share with y'all that we did ask for, we too, the TPAC asked for kind of confirmation that during the pre-testing mode that it would qualify. Jay was able to get an email from FTA indicating that it does, and it's very specific, saying that it does include pre-revenue service testing and other related startups. And so that was a question we had, and with that email, we're putting it to you for consideration now.
Mr. Chair, if I can just give a little bit of groundwork, and that may answer any questions anybody may have.
Because this is a project that was not on the list that we were looking at last month. This is not one that was.
Well, when
on that list.
we actually did put in, when there was a call for the projects at the meeting, we did put in for it. And basically what happened was, when we initially started planning for the streetcar, there wasn't any money available in 18. This was a couple years ago. So that's why we couldn't do the startup because there was no money in CMAQ available. So we have years fiscal 19, 20, and 21 is where we're putting in our assistance to try to get this program going. Once there was money available in 18, obviously we're moving that 3-year funding forward a year. So that's where this $2 million came from. is not, and it's an eligible expense because this is all startup money that we're doing. In rail, as opposed to bus or fixed route, there's a large lead time for pre-revenue service. We're going to do almost 6 months of pre-revenue service because we get cars every month, and the state and the FTA, streetcar operations falls under FTA for guidance. And it has to, all this has to be certified by FTA / the SSO office for TxDOT prior to any revenue service, which we're hoping to start in November. So we're going to start pre-revenue service actually in May as we get more cars, because we have to do a full dress rehearsal for almost 6 months under the scenario we have. And hopefully then we'll get certified in October or so from FTA / TxDOT, and then we start revenue service in November. So the moving is forward is what we would have wanted, but because there was no money available in CMAQ a couple of years ago for 18, now there is. Now we can move these projects forward. And again, it's a large expense for startup costs, not only because of just starting the revenue service and its rail, but also we have to train every person we have that's going into the system. We have to buy additional equipment that aren't capital, that came under the 97 million from the state for capital, but is more of the operating expense. Parts, those type of things that aren't eligible under the 97 million. So that's why we like to move this project forward.
This wouldn't be eligible for that either.
It would be eligible for
If it's operating?
for light bulbs, for filters, for those type of things that are considered operating, as opposed to a forklift or a crane. Those type of heavier items that are actually become part of the building under capital.
I'm glad it's somebody I like, so I can ask Jay some questions. Jay, you know, everybody knows this isn't my favorite project at all. It hurt a lot of major projects in Texas. I want to be clear, though. You said FTA. First off, if we give you CMAQ dollars, that's because it's converted. But the money that you received was not FTA dollars or CMAQ. It was state dollars for the trolley.
Total 100%.
And I want to keep you honest, because I think there's going to be some struggles, and it won't be me. It'll be whatever council's around. So what are the total dollars now? You had 19, 20, 21. You're going to cut off 21, bring it to 18 for that 3-year period. But have the total dollars gone up from what you originally had approved for 18, 19? And
I think we initially, in the TIP, the initial out years only went to 20. And so we only had 2 $1 million years. The third year, which I don't believe has been approved yet for the new TIP, would have been 2.
My math is that you've gone up about another $1 million. So what's the total? This will probably
total would be
approved,
$4 million
okay.
for 3 years.
So $4 million for 3 years. Then have you got a plan? Because I personally believe that the city is going to have to dig deep after that, and you won't be able to get any more CMAQ funds.
Correct. Yes.
Because there's a limit. HWA is going to cut you off and say, okay, you had 3 years. Now, you can try to extend that out a little bit if you don't spend it all in those 3 years, but you've got a maximum total 5 years before you've got to figure out how you're going to pay for this.
Yeah, we've done all our numbers for operating and we have divvied out how this funding is going to eventually pay for the operating.
And I'm going to ask ahead of time down the future, because again, I think we need to be very clear about this. This has changed policy and law all over the state of Texas because of this project. Are you going to give us a good accounting of these dollars that's going to be specific to the trolley? Because once they're converted to FTA, how do we know you're not using it for other Sun Metro operations?
Because, well, for one thing, when it goes to FTA, we report quarterly as a grant. It'll be a grant. And so that money will be.
But they just ask you. You just sign off.
No, we will actually apply for this money through FTA in a grant, and we will tell them what the project is, and then we report quarterly to FTA on that grant, and we do it for every grant. So this one, when that money goes over as a streetcar grant, we're reporting it as streetcar operating. We get audited every year. FTA does a triennial audit every 3 years, and we report quarterly to FTA. And obviously, it's very specific on these grants that we explain what the money's for, where it's going to, and there is no, well, I'm gonna take $1 million and throw it on Brio. That
Jay,
can't,
there-
it's impossible to happen.
And I'll give you the fact that there are gonna be unknowns, no matter
Sure.
what. I mean, I don't think anybody knows exactly what it's gonna cost. There's gonna be a whole bunch of people riding it when it first starts. It's gonna be new. People will be waving hands, and then it's just gonna nosedive and just, there won't be anything left. So, when do you think you'll have a good idea? I just heard today that you actually won't be in full operation, people paying fares until November of this
Right.
year?
Right, because the
And how do you participate as a public service now? How do I participate though between now and November? If you're gonna be doing testing, who gets to ride? I mean, can I ride it?
No. We may do some soft
Is that
days.
because it's me?
Well, no, we're going to give you an annual pass for the rest of your life. But
No, I mean, but you're gonna need to get that out too, because I think there's gonna be some people frustrated thinking they're gonna see a trolley and it's running. Because I just learned something new. It's gonna be running up and down starting in May through November, but it's not open to the public.
initially we'll have one
So
car,
this
2
helps.
cars,
Okay.
3 cars, 4 cars. We build it up. We may have some soft days to where we do, once we know the pre-revenue's good, once
don't
we
you
get
need-
certified by the state,
Don't you need to wait? I'm serious. Don't you need to have people on there to see if you can make some of these grades? And
we'll be doing those testing. I mean, we won't actually have people.
I would.
We'll,
Peter?
we'll simulate those.
We'll go together.
We'll simulate those weights.
Okay. Well, no, this
Yeah,
is.
we'll simulate weights and all that stuff, and then we eventually will have we'll do some test days. One of the things we have to be worried about is we can't really haul people because we aren't certified by the state yet, or state/FTA. That has to happen, and we have all this testing we have to do because they will come a couple times in the next couple months to look and see our operations.
Well, again, this is good information, I think, for the people out there. I'm not going to support this. I can't. My conscience won't let me. But I think the information that we all just learned here today was probably new, and I appreciate that, Jay. Thank you.
All right, that leads us to the, I just have one question before, and Mr. Beal, will recognize you, because I was reviewing the document. I assume this is a document that was provided by the district. Okay, so I'm going to start there, and then I just want to ask a question first. There is a note at the end of, at the bottom of page 1. At the January 10, 2018 TPAC meeting, MPO staff notified members the district did not submit the electronic project request forms prior to a December 2017 deadline. The district does not have any record from the MPO staff notifying TPAC or TPB members of this December 20th, 2017 deadline. Consequently, these projects were not recommended to the TPAC members. After the TPAC members voted on the recommended projects for the fiscal year 2018 reconciliation funds, it was acknowledged on record there was still balance of over $7 million that was not addressed. The TPAC members did not recommend any projects for the available $7 million. I'll stop there. So I want to give you the opportunity to address this. There's a lot to unpack here. But if you can walk me through whether these statements are, in your estimation, are accurate, and if they are, to explain the actions of TPAC to the board.
Yes, I think the actions, what you're reading here is correct, in the sense that, again, we looked at a project. Was there a formal call for project? I would tell you no. As a TPAC member, I don't think so. We did every month, though, at the end of the meeting, it includes when the next meeting is and when the agenda deadline is, including a 3 o'clock deadline. This is to allow staff, obviously, the opportunity to comply with state law and get the postings made. I understand that. And to be honest with you, we took the conservative thing, saying that if a project hasn't made that deadline, then we can't consider it because it's not a part of the agenda. Okay, that's what the committee decided to do there. Whether or not under Robert's Rules of Order, which I know or whatever, or by bylaws, we didn't have that to understand whether or not an agenda has to be 100% finished when it's presented or not. I'm just, because I too have kind of looked into this, and without kind of researching, at the end of the day, the bylaws of this organization, not something like Robert Rules of Order, we again went the conservative route and considered that we're going to follow your direction, that being the direction that we felt like we were doing and defer to y'all then and not consider. That goes to why we didn't consider anything more, because they didn't arrive before the 3 o'clock deadline, or, okay, on that date. So that's kind of where we stood.
And then to the second part of that paragraph regarding 7 million that was not addressed.
Again, it goes to no projects presented that met the deadline, so if we're gonna take that tack, that if it's not in time, then we can't consider it, then we can't look at a project that might have been, if you will, after the fact, saying, well, it didn't. To be honest with you, I was expecting an agenda item to be asked for at this meeting by another agency, potentially, because then they could make the deadline, and it would then end up on the agenda here. But that didn't happen, so, because I don't think a project necessarily has to come through the TPAC to be presented to y'all.
The projects that are on here, were those the only ones that were considered? Were there projects that you didn't approve?
There were projects that were presented to us that arrived after.
No, not those. I mean, were there any other projects that you considered, or were they just these 5 that were here? So the 5 that were presented were all approved?
I believe so. I don't think we had, they used up the money we had available, and with some free balances, yes. Right, correct?
Roger Williams with the El Paso MPO. In your backup, there's a table that has all the projects that were submitted to you.
I saw that.
The ones that are on the agenda are the ones that were recommended by the TPAC.
Okay.
So you do have the information there that those other projects, 2 projects that were submitted to us. And those are the ones that did not make the deadline according to the TPAC agendas that are posted every month. And the agendas that we work with at our meetings have the information on when to submit projects for the next meeting. That is the deadline that we went by when we looked at projects that were coming to us, if they came in according to what was posted on the agenda from the previous month.
So if those other projects had met we're calling it a deadline, it looks like there's enough money that one of the 2 may have been included, because again, my question just was, these 5 projects really didn't compete or rank. There was plenty enough money just to approve them regardless.
There is additional money left over. You can see it's also in your backup. It's split between 3 funding categories, one of them being CMAQ, which is very specific to its use. And yes, you are correct. At least one of those projects could have been funded.
And I would add that, again, using the deadline as the way we took that, had there been more than one project, then we would have gone through a ranking process. But we didn't do that because we were using the deadline as the deadline.
Okay. Mr. Bielik? Yes, sir. Okay, well, hold on. Sorry. Well, I'd let Mr. Bielik, who's going to recognize him.
Okay, let me go through all of these. I find this whole discussion somewhat disingenuous. The projects we're talking, the projects that we're talking about.
Excuse me, sir. Let me start with this. I know there's there's going to be a contentious nature to this. I understand that there's been a lot of conversations about this, but I would ask that we keep our remarks respectful. Starting your remarks by calling people disingenuous is not following with that. So I just asked that when I asked TPAC, I said, "Is there anything that you would say is inaccurate?" And so I just let's be
all right. Well, let's get to
Please,
accuracy then. Those 2 projects, the original forms were submitted in May of 2017. It's almost a year ago. In October of 2017, at the TPAC meeting, our staff requested that they be considered for reconciliation funds. Now, there's something about a December 20th deadline. Our staff was called by MPO staff on December 22nd and asked, "Aren't you submitting something?" So we sent in some updated forms, but they were simply updates. They reduced the amount of money that was requested for each one because we have better estimates. So I believe we're playing games. Now, with respect to the projects, A, we have no problem with. B, we think is a good project. The only issue that we have with it is that, as we understand it, it's for a 4-lane road. What's in the MTP is a 2-lane road. What's in the network is a 2-lane road. The likelihood is that's going to get kicked out when it gets to FHWA because it's a different project. We would prefer to see that go into the 2045 Destino, go into the network the way it's supposed to be. We're happy to support it. It's an important project. It's going to require fairly significant environmental. It's going to require an IJAR for a new interchange with I-10, but we do think it's a very important project. C is the Wynn Road project. We're doing oversight on that. Our project manager indicates that we have nothing at all from the city to justify any increase in the construction cost. I can't support something where we are the oversight agency and we have no information supporting the request. With respect to CBD 4, that was originally programmed in 2001. There was $1.5 million in that for preliminary engineering. FHWA would not support that expenditure because nothing ever came out of it. In 2014, the city came back to this board and requested $300,000 for preliminary engineering to keep the project alive. It was approved, and that was expended. In 2016, the whole project was defunded, thrown out, and then refunded, including $1.8 million for preliminary engineering, and our records indicate that there's never been a charge against that $1.8 million. So right now, there's $2.1 million, $300,000, and $1.8 million that's toward preliminary engineering, asking for another $1.5 million, which amounts to over 30% of the proposed construction cost. Now, the reality is, folks, you should be able to do planning, schematic design, PS&E, and construction engineering and inspection for less than 30%. So I can't support that. With respect to operating funds for the trolley, there have been funds programmed before. The trolley is constructed with 100% funds, state funds, without any local contribution. We would look there to be some local contribution. We think maybe that's in some of the operating expense. We did go along with that money that has already been programmed, but we're not going to agree to or vote for any additional funding. So that's where we sit. I will vote for A, and I will vote no on all the remainder of them.
Okay.
Just a correction for Bob. We paid $5 million to do the planning, the specification writing, all the way up to the actual award of the contract. So we actually, out of that $97 million, you can add another $5 million that we pay in COs, Sun Metro pays in COs towards this project. So we did put in $5 million.
Okay, and we're gonna, yes, Representative.
There are a lot of items that Mr. Bielik brought up, and I think that staff should address item by item, because I think it's the explanation will kind of address some of your concerns, Mr. Bielik.
Well, so do you want to defer to the sponsoring entity to address those concerns, or do you want to walk through them?
Kind of depends on the nature of the question, but
Okay,
probably
so
to the
let's
deferring.
let's just go back through them. I was trying to keep my notes, but on B, and Mr. Bielik, just correct me when I go through. The concern was the 2-lane versus 4-lane and how that's being essentially how it's being. Can you just lay that concern out one more time?
Yeah, typically what will happen is if you change the scope of the project from what is in the existing MTP and in the network, FHWA will kick it back. And to give you an example, the managed lanes that we were going to add to 375, the reason that we're not letting that project this year is because FHWA has said you have to go back to the model and rerun those as free lanes instead of managed lanes.
Okay.
So what I don't want to do is to approve this now, have FHWA throw it back, and then we have to go through all this again. I would rather get it correct in the new plan and then run with it. Again, it's a project that we are happy to support. It's an important project.
Okay. You want to defer?
I'll defer.
Okay. Did you?
Oh, yeah, I understand.
Okay.
I understand completely what you're talking about, but one of the things is that this PE is just engineering, you know, and that's what we're looking for funding. You know, I know that we need this project, we desperately need this project, and not just us, you know, we're talking about everybody in the region in that end. You know, if you're just basing your stuff on what happened prior, I mean, maybe there's other reasons why the other project didn't get done. One of the things is that we're asking for PE money. That's what we need to get this project going. You know, the only thing is that what's gonna happen to all these funding? You know, if we don't, if they're just gonna sit there, or, you know, is TikTok gonna come in and try to get that money for other projects? You know, because basically that's what it seems like. You know, I know that we have to be, you know, have proper etiquette here, but you know,
I did
I'll
ask
just leave it
that.
at
I asked
that.
that of,
I'll just leave it
I've
at
asked that of
that.
other folks, so
I'll just leave it at that.
okay. Thank you very much. Representative Gonzalez.
Did the TPAC policy board, when they were making these recommendations, bring up the concern that Mr. Bielik is bringing up? Did they,
No.
was that a
No, ma'am, it did
conversation?
not.
Okay, and the second question I have is, in the documents presented by TxDOT, it says that there's still available money from the end of the year's fund, or did we use all the money?
No, there is available money.
There's still available money. And do we have, how long do we have to make a decision on the available money?
That one I'll defer to Roger, I'm sorry.
It's fine.
The available money is for 2018, but it's by fiscal year, federal fiscal year 2018. So by the time you get to the February STIP revisions, which we are still waiting on to find out if that's going to happen, they normally would have been submitted by now, but there's a delay. This is about the time where you need to make sure you, depending on the nature of the project, you need to program those funds. If the funds don't get programmed in time that you can develop a project and get it obligated within the fiscal year, being 2018 in this case, those funds at the end of the year normally run over or roll over into the next year. And so that's what happened with these funds, in that we reconciled what was left and then brought funds from 27 into what we already had in 18. And then we realized in some of the funding categories we had a balance. So at the end of every year, we reconcile and they roll over. Policy that was passed by the policy board, I think it was in December, was that we would develop a end of fund year policy that would allow us to go ahead and start looking at those funds that are available to do exactly what we're trying to do now. So it's important, though, that we program these funds, to answer your question, as soon as possible, and in this case, the February revisions, which is where we're at this point in time.
Roger, can I ask you a question? I'm going to support Socorro's project. At the same time, I believe it's going to get kicked back, but I don't want to be the bad guy. So I'm going to support it. But I believe it is going to get kicked back. Why aren't we asking these questions? Because this has happened before when we were doing direct connects on 375 and I-10, where what we actually let and do is different that's in our plan, because they are going to look. I mean, FHWA is going to take a look, and even if it is P&E, they're going to say, wait a minute, this is 2-lane, you're asking for 4-lane. I mean, I think it's going to get kicked back too. That doesn't mean we can't take action later, but why do we even have that discussion on this item today? I mean, it should have been, whoops, you guys are asking for something.
There should have been more
different.
discussion on it. There's two plans going on right now. The plan that we're in right now is that the project that's known as TIWA is in 3 pieces, and it is, for all practical purposes, the same project as far as the project. Its scope, though, in its entirety, is what's in the next plan, in the Destino 2045. So we're
submitting under the
under this
current
plan.
one.
You're correct.
And so it doesn't take over until that.
That's correct. And the urgency, though, and back to the other question, is that these are 2018 funds that need to be programmed in 2018.
And they
So-
might. I
and
mean,
they might.
FHWA might with the consideration that it's in.
Right,
we tell them
and
that
that's,
it's in the new
that's
plan.
sort of the line of thought that we're going by too, is that, you know, those things need to be discussed, and it's
I'd
up to
rather err on that side
FHWA.
and support that project, but.
Yeah, FHWA will make the call ultimately as to, yes, sir.
But I remember we're trying to develop this checklist in the past. You know, do you have your matching funds? Is it ready to let? Talking about being obligated in 2018. All these we feel can be obligated in 2018, right?
As far as
Okay.
the PE part, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Senator, did you have a question?
My thoughts are along Chairman Pickett's expression, because it seems to me, I guess my first question was going to be to Mr. Billig or somebody
Well-
as to whether or not, on this question of whether the Federal Highway Administration automatically rejects, turns back these kinds of proposals, or whether there are extenuating circumstances, mitigation, or some considerations.
If you could tell us every time what the feds are going to do on our stuff, can you do that on every project that we put?
Part of the problem is Gesundheit. Part of the problem is that by their rules, they should reject it.
But they might not.
All we're saying is that there's really almost no difference in timing
Yeah.
to do it under the plan where it is in there the way it's supposed to be. We're talking about a couple of months, and we may lose that time if it is kicked back. So that's all we're saying.
So you.
I want to be clear, we support this project.
Yes,
We think
I heard
it's
you.
a very important project.
Yeah. So.
What we just don't want to do is to show TPMP in TxDOT, we don't want to show FHWA that we're doing things wrong and hoping they'll miss it.
Are you, on your comments now, are you suggesting that what Roger has said is not the case, that if we don't act now, that we would lose these funds? You seem to be suggesting that there's an opportunity to still be able to tap into them.
Actually, there's a delay in the February STIP. I do not know whether or not if we change years, we'll be able to get things into the February STIP. I really can't
Okay,
tell
well-
you that that's the case.
well-
My concern is, and I'll just leave this for everybody in here, we're going to finish a corridor study later this year, which is going to identify need between $2 and $4 billion just to deal with I-10. The formula funding that the MPO receives isn't going to come anywhere near covering that. So we're going to depend upon administration and the commission for the money to address those needs. Now, every time I go up and ask for money, I hear about, well, you built a trolley. We gave you $100 million for a trolley. You don't have any other needs. What are the locals doing? And so now I see the MPO is coming back to spend year-end funds, which are not spending. There's no construction in any of this. I also look, and administration's asking, well, you had to move a project out of this fiscal year. Haven't you replaced it? Well, we had 2 projects to replace what we took out, and TPAC said we were late, even though we had them in almost a year ago. That's what we're facing from a strategic standpoint.
Well, so my point, Mr. Chairman, I feel somewhat like Chairman Pickett. I think what we're faced with here is the choice of going forward and having the Federal Highway Administration reject it and starting all over again, or not going forward and losing the money. So I'd rather roll the dice and try to tap into those funds rather than losing them. Not to mention that this is a needed project and supported by our district engineer. So to me, the choice is simple. We don't act, we may lose the money. And, you know, we've had many instances where we because we don't act, we end up losing money. And I understand the whole question of the TPAC concern about not having met the deadline, but sometimes, ultimately, the decision is ours to make. I think I understood you say that. And so I think the choice is clear.
And if I may add real quickly, because I want to kind of point out that there was, if you will, lots of times when we do a formal call for projects, the transportation alternative programs, okay? And there's a lot of vetting that goes on actually with those, okay? This is really more just meeting an agenda deadline that was established to meet for our January meeting, which occurred in December. And the Christmas holiday, the holiday is always a tough time of year. There's a lot of people missing. I'm not trying to give excuses, but I think that's a process we need to all look at and get guidance from y'all on how we can better improve how we might handle year-end funds in the future, to be honest with you, because there's a lot of controversy right now over whether or not, like I said, whether or not an agenda deadline makes everything has to be 100% even. And I don't know that. I need guidance from council and others to understand to what level do we need it to take to, so I can better respond to y'all with recommendations. And I say us, the committee, okay?
Let me ask you. Hold on real quick, Mayor.
Would you like me to be present for the TPAC meetings?
I don't know that that's necessary, to be honest with you, but I'll I'd have to think about that and defer to that, because I feel like we need some guidance on whether or not our basic idea to begin with today, it kind of goes back to the agenda.
Sure.
If you didn't meet the agenda deadline of 3 o'clock, does everything have to be 100% finished at 3 o'clock?
Well,
And I don't know that that's true.
Yes, Mayor.
From the city standpoint, you got to meet an agenda item. You got to have a deadline. Those things happen. My question is for clarification. The comments Mr. Bielik made about having these submitted in 16 or 17 or whatever, is that applicable or not applicable to this discussion?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know how to answer that. I know there wasn't an agenda item requesting that we consider those applications filed earlier in the year, okay?
So
I'll say it that
basically,
way.
they're dormant unless they're resurrected as an agenda item. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, that's the position I think that the committee took.
Okay, so they're just kind of in never land unless they're brought forth. It's okay.
We're going to vote on these items. Mr. Medina or Roger, both of you together, what's going to be the recommendation, though, on the balance? We heard it should roll over, but we're also talking about maybe, we never know what's going to happen. So my question directly is, should we now address the 7 million as quickly as we can?
It would be probably a smart thing to go ahead and do that. Let me just say, it depends on the February revisions itself. If that is pushed to the point where we can still take this, if there's not even a February revision, or if they do some compromise between May and February, we may still have time to submit these.
Well,
Whether or not they
again,
can be
we don't know
obligated
that.
is the key.
We don't know that. So
We don't know that.
So would the recommendation to this board, aside from the vote we're going to take here in a minute, do something as soon as possible, that TPAC make a recommendation on the end of year balance?
Well, let me say one thing before that. We have, just to clarify, we have never lost funds before. When there's funds left on the table in a fiscal year, they do roll over to the next year. We have not yet. I'm not saying that that's not a possibility, because it certainly is.
Okay, and I want to go, and one second, just to clarify, so to flesh out, I think the conversation y'all are having is, can you enlighten the board about what we're talking about in February, why we're voting on this today in terms of the STIP revision, and that there's some question about a delay there, and how that may actually extend this conversation. But we don't know. We don't have the answer in front of us today.
Why we're voting on this today is there's a PE policy. There's three things going on here, first of all. There's the TAP call that we brought back to the policy board, and there was a list of projects that we needed to narrow it down and bring it back.
Because
okay?
the reconciliation was lower than
no, separate from that, the reconciliation, you're right, did impact that. And there was only so much money, and we had like 11 projects, or 9 or 11 projects. The other thing is there's a policy, the PE policy for STP, that has been for several years now in place, and nobody has ever taken us up on it. It is specifically written so that by the February revisions, we have something that the entities want to move forward, or that 20% that we cut out of the allocation rolls back into the balance and it's available for everything. So up until February, entities, except for TxDOT, the county, and the city of El Paso on the Texas side, are eligible for this fund. If they don't take it by this time, it goes back into the overall balance. TxDOT, city, anybody can use it at that time. The other thing is that we know in the development of a project, if it's a construction project, and you've got many elements in there that you're looking at that have to be done, and for example, your environmental has to be done, your PS&E has to be done, and many things that are going on in that project. We're looking at where the development is within the time frame of letting it within a fiscal year. If by this time it's not well on its way, it's not going to make it. So by the time we get here, if you're doing a construction project, you should make the February revisions. After that, you run the risk of not getting it obligated in time. The other thing is that the end-of-year fund balance, or policy that was developed and that the TPB passed, is there's a very tight window from the time we reconcile, usually in December, until we get to the January TPB meeting, where the TPB needs to make a recommendation on the February revisions. And then you got the holidays right in the middle of that. It's a very tight time frame, but the way it's written, and it has to be able to, as it says at the end of that policy, after, first of all, is it in the MTP and the TIP, it must be ready to let within the specific time. To get it out within the specific time, you got to hit the February revisions, unless perhaps it's a project like operations, an FTA transfer. That's quick, that's easy. You could do that, not even hit the February revisions. Buying buses or something like that's a possibility. PE, probably you can get that done within this time. But if it's a construction project, that's different. That, though, is really why the February revisions are so important, that these two policies, the way they're written, and that, in this case, the TAP thing came into, and to get it all out within 2018, we're out of time, and we need to hit it pretty much now. Now, will we get the February revisions? I don't know. I've asked TxDOT, and I'm talking about not the district, I'm talking about in Austin. I don't know how many times. I'm not getting a reply. Okay? We were told that around the state that there was going to be basically a need. If you have a need, maybe we'll have a February revision. So I think all the MPOs were polled. We said, yes, we need a February revisions. We've got a lot of things going on. But in trying to find out, and the deadline to submit, I think it was Tuesday, well, we have our packet ready. We've already submitted it to the district. We're ready. And I'm asking, are we having a February revision? I'm not getting a reply. I don't know. I can't tell you when it's going to happen. But we have not had it yet. It could come next week. I don't know. Or it could be delayed all the way until May.
Okay. Yes, Jay.
Just so if I understand that, and maybe it could be a legal question, we could easily approve the rest of the $7 million to go to TxDOT for their project.
Well, not today.
No, I mean, we could say for next meeting, we could have this approved based on what Mr. Bielik's saying, and based on the fact that it may be late for the agenda for the TPAC, but it still can be approved by us. Is that correct? No. Right?
Not necessarily. Depends on when
Yeah,
the STIP
yeah, it's really,
forwards.
I mean, that's kind of the.
And someone want to tell
$5
everybody
million
what the STIP is? It's the State Transportation Improvement Program. That's the state's short-term plan.
That's right.
And what we and all the MPOs are waiting on is to see if TxDOT updates that.
That's correct.
Which means go.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And we don't know that date.
No,
We don't.
because they've got, I mean, their unified transportation plan has been put on hold. And yesterday's discussion in Austin was, so the STIP is probably not high on the agenda right this very second, unless it's to try to take care of some of the problems being caused in the 10-year plan.
Yes, sir.
Did I understand you to say that we cannot vote today on using some of the 7 million?
Oh, No, I don't, that is not posted on the agenda. I think that would be outside. I mean, that's,
But on this particular item, it's discussion and action to approve.
these are, yeah, to approve the recommendations of TPAC, which don't include that 7 million being spent. I think the question is, if you have a delay in the STIP revision, do you have the possibility of coming back here and handling this later?
I see.
So,
Okay.
I mean,
Thank you.
it is a possibility,
Quick
but it's
question,
not something that
Chairman?
anyone can guarantee.
Chairman?
Yes, sorry.
Just the alternative could be we issue out a new call for projects with a quick turnover
I don't
time.
think that that's what we would have to do in this case, but Roger was going to chime in, I
Yeah,
think.
Roger's got I asked Roger a question about kind of the urgency of some of the projects, if you will.
And we're going to verify a couple of things. Like I was saying about construction projects and the timing to get them in the February revisions, and A is clearly that. There's no doubt about it. B, being a PE policy, doesn't have the same criteria. C, you would look at it and go, well, it does. But hang on a second, that's not necessarily true. The reason being because this potentially is administrative, which means it doesn't need to go to the February STIP revisions. It's the one on here that would probably not have to go. So we could probably do that. D, it likely needs to go through the February revisions. It got money on it already. There's a question whether it could be done administrative or not. And E, well, that one's not the case. The one that I think TxDOT is talking about that they would like to put the $7 million on, and we're double checking some numbers right now, may be able to be done administratively. In other words, what I'm saying is if we brought it back next month, we may be able to shave off a lot of the time through what's necessary in a formal STIP revision by doing an administrative amendment to the STIP and potentially still have enough time for TxDOT to get that money, I think, on that project.
The commission meets before we meet. The commission will meet
The last
before this
Thursday.
body, so
Yeah,
even if we postpone or say we'll do something in February, they've already met. We'll either know that the STIP was taken up or not.
I guess what I'm saying is the question on the $7 million, we may still be able to get it in if it went to the next TPAC and the TPB because the project itself is already existing in our document and it may be able to be expedited. With your approval next month, even if we've missed the February revision, if it's administrative, we can still get that money on it in time to obligate it this year.
Okay. Mike, did you want to?
I think that ultimately that there's so many unknowns right now. And again, we don't know what the federal partner is going to do. I can sit here and defend every project in terms of processes. But I think that we should move forward if there's a recommendation to do that. And also is that I would also ask the policy board to direct the MPO to come back with alternatives of projects that can absorb the remaining balances. And if we do have a STIP revision within that same time frame, we can always come back and make a recommendation to the policy board. But I think that moving forward is that I think internally in terms of the policies that address the reconciliation, we do observe some challenges. And I think that it is the due diligence of the MPO staff to come back and make better recommendations to the board. And then ultimately for the board to have the flexibility as it has through policy to make recommendations for projects to absorb all the reconciliation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Roger, just a point of for clarification, the project that you just referenced, the TxDOT, the one you just referenced, which one is that?
It's an operational improvement project on I-10. It's at Desert Boulevard on the far west side of town. And I have checked, and the rules do, according to what I have here, we have about $7.5 million in that project right now. The administrative amendment would fall within the 50% rule, which means we could expedite that project potentially even if we didn't have February revision. I believe, I mean, we're doing this on the fly, but I believe it could be done.
Bob?
We submitted it last May.
Okay.
And on that point, I mean, we were aware of these projects. MPO staff was totally aware of the, but the TPB directed us to come back with the year-end policy and consider projects. So with that said, I mean, I know of a lot of projects out there that need funding, but if I didn't receive something specifically for that purpose, then I didn't know that that project was for that consideration. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I'm gonna.
I'd like to call the question on each item individually.
Okay, so
So no more discussion.
let's, I want to, because I think we have public comment on this item. So we probably need to take that first before we divide it up. Let's take public comment, then we'll go through each item.
Mr. Scott White for public comment on item number 5.
Good morning once again, members of the board. Once again, Scott White, with the El Paso Bicycle Pedestrian Coalition. One of the things I haven't heard discussed here, and while budget is greatly important, I haven't heard discussions about safety. I haven't heard discussions about how this is actually improving access. We talk about these programs and these projects as being important, but for whom? We're making certain assumptions about what these are and how they're going to work, but how do they fit into the larger project? Projects like making sure there's easy access for students at UTEP. That's important so they can get on and off campus safely. But when we start saying that we need to connect to projects that may connect to projects that are only proposed, are we looking too far forward? When we question transit and how it's funded, but we don't question how other projects are funded, are we making certain assumptions there? How do all these projects fit into the larger vision of how we are going to make sure that people can get around this region safely, efficiently, and as in the manner that they choose, rather than just in the assumption that they're going to have to get in a truck, get in a car? Once again, I started off this morning asking you, we need a combined vision that really looks at everything as a whole versus this ad hoc vision. I say it again, we need a holistic vision of how these programs, how these projects help everyone using every mode of all abilities, of all ages, get safely to their destination. Not just people who have cars, not just people who are fit, all people of all ages, of all abilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Do we have any further public comment on item 5 as a whole?
No additional public comment.
Okay. Chairman Pickett, let me circle back to you.
I'd like to call the question on each item 5A, B, C, D, and E individually.
So you're, okay, to a request that we break these out. All right. So, thank you, Representative Gonzalez. So we'll take up 5A.
Move to approve 5A.
Okay, I have a motion to approve 5A. I have a second, Mayor Margot. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, 5A prevails. Do I have a motion regarding 5B? I have a motion and a second on 5B. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Any abstaining? 5B prevails. Do I have a motion on 5C? Okay, I've got a motion and a second to approve 5C. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Any abstaining? Motion prevails. Do I have a motion on 5D? Okay, got a motion and a second on 5D.
I'm sorry, who seconded?
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
No. No.
Any abstaining? 5D prevails. Do I have a motion on item 5E? Okay, I have a motion and a second on 5E. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No. No.
Any abstaining? Motion prevails. please move to item 6, reports. Actually, before we do that, I just want to thank everybody for the conversation and for the dialogue. We all learned from this process, and I know that you can't have a board this size and agree on things. And especially Jay and Chairman Pickett, I think they're going to take this outside. No, I do appreciate the discussion, because I think it educates us also to have these discussions. Go ahead and move to 6, please.
Item number 6 is report on the amended Horizon 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan.
Roger Williams, El Paso MPO, and this is the amendment, not the current new plan that we're working on. So as you know, we've been doing 2 plans at the same time, and this one was approved by the Policy Board back in April of last year and submitted to the Federal Highway Administration for review. So you can see on your report here, there's 3 dates that I noted where we received our last comments in December on the 8th, and there was 4 comments, or there was 4 items there, I should say, that we were working with. And then I have another item where we followed up with Federal Highway on December the 20th, and then we actually in that time frame we sent between those 2 dates, we sent materials to FHWA for their review, and what that was some of the questions that they had concerning the model for the amendment. So the third date there was the 5th of January. I followed up again with Federal Highway and was asking for some decisions that if they had been made about what we had provided. This table that you see down here is what I'm talking about. We had provided them the results of the model for the Horizon 2040 amendment. And what's important about this is that it shows what the difference is between the conformity that we originally did for the amendment and what has changed in our model as a result of Federal Highway's review. And in the end, it's very minor, and you can see percentage-wise in the last column of that table, and that's by the network years in the model. Then you see my statement down here at the bottom, basically that we haven't had a determination yet on these results. And what's going on is Federal Highway has submitted these numbers, and there's a lot of players in this process. After you guys make your approval, we still have a lot of work to do, and in this case, Federal Highway has taken this information and moved it over to TxDOT in Austin, the Transportation Planning and Programming section. And they have also, the TPMP has also provided these numbers over to TTI, the Texas Transportation Institute, which is, we through a TxDOT contract work with them in doing analyses for us for conformity purposes. This table right now, and just to let you know, as of last night, I talked to Federal Highway. So that's not showing up on this report, and I wanted a status about where are we at with this. The status that I'm getting from them in our phone conversation is that all of these items that we have up here above have been addressed. What's left is this information here. So TxDOT, TPMP, and TTI are looking at how do we quantify this or maybe qualify it, but in the end we have to go back and say, okay, what changed? And what we have in our conformity document are actual numbers. And how does this impact those numbers? Well, it's tricky because it's not through an actual modeling effort. It's potentially through an effort to develop a comparison of those numbers and then go back to the conformity and say, how do we adjust your numbers? That's one way. Or we have to rerun our models. And We're waiting on TPMP, TXDOT-TPMP, and TTI to come back and tell us what their recommendation is. One, they may come up with a methodology and say apply this, or two, they may come back and go, well, in the interest of time, it's easier to just rerun your models. My question back to FHWA was, well, what would that do to us? Would we have to back up in the process and, for example, go back out to public review? And they said no. They can already tell us, you're going to pass conformity. That's not the issue. It's just how do we quantify these numbers into your conformity. So I would like to be able to stand here today and tell you we are receiving the letters that we need, but I can't do that. We still have this one more step that has to happen. But I'm hearing from Federal Highway that it is not going to change the fact that everything else has been addressed and that we're right there and about to get approval.
Long explanation of good news.
I'd like to say next time I'm going to be able to actually tell you it was approved.
It's good news, right?
It is good news, I think. In all reality, I think it is.
Be happy.
I am happy. Ecstatic.
Come on.
Okay.
Next item on the agenda is item number 7, Destino 2045 MTP development.
Okay, this is the other plan, and we've been developing this plan since, well, the beginning of last year, and we are at a point right now where we're about to go out for another round of public involvement. You can see in the report here we've been working on the model. That's the El Paso MPO coding portion. We're in the testing phase of that right now. We've got the project list. We've got all the projects in the model. We've got the coding done, and it's to that point where we're going to turn it over here really soon for the emissions, and that'll run right into item 2, the conformity report, which, by the way, is in very good shape. We've already developed that document, and it just, for all practical purposes, it needs the numbers when we get the emissions runs and drop it in. Tip development, we've developed all the projects in that your tips overlap. We currently have a 17 through 20, so you got 19 and 20 at the end. You're going to have a new tip here pretty soon, the 19 through 22. So 19 and 20 overlaps. We already have, for all practical purposes, the first 2 years of the tip. Through the efforts and the work that was done with the TPAC in the last few months and approved by the policy board, and I'm talking about the project list that was brought back to the policy board, that brings in 2 new tip years. We've developed those projects in the tip, and the document is well on its way, ready, as well as the conformity document about 90% ready and to go out for public review. The chapters of the Destino 2045 MTP, you have seen this information, a lot of it. And when Alliance Transportation Group, by the way, they are on the phone and listening and can answer questions. They have developed a lot of work, analyses, needs assessment, and we've got information from the visioning meetings and the goals and objectives and the guiding principles, and all the work that they have done is available on this El Paso Forward website. You can get to it on this link that's provided here. You can also get to it off the El Paso MPO webpage. All of the information to date is there, and it's available for your review. There's also an online survey that will be hitting there very soon. And in conjunction with these dates that you see here for public involvement, being the January 29th, 30th, 31st, and February the 1st next week, Alliance will be out here. We'll be at these locations, and the online survey is available, and all the information is available. We're sending out to all of our partners and our contact lists that this information is available on the webpage and available for comments. And this is prior to the required 30-day public comment period, which you see down below, the March 9th to the April 9th timeframe. That is required 30-day public involvement that comes right out of our public participation program. That's where you will receive additional comments that are the formal comments for the plan, and it will be brought back, the plan, the conformity, and the tip will be brought back to the policy board in April after the formal public involvement for your consideration of approval. So that's the Destino 2045 MTP. We're keeping you up to date, trying to give you reports every 2 weeks, and things are dynamic and changing. So every time I get up here to give you a report, I have to give you additional information that you haven't actually seen yet. If you have any questions.
Senator, yes, sir.
With regard to the public involvement, what you indicate here, and I understand this may be part of the public participation plan that we have, but we're talking about having, as you describe it here, open house style public involvement. And I have a problem with that. I really do. I mean, I've gone to some of those open house type of public involvement sessions. And basically what you have is individuals having to go from station to station, getting information or asking questions of individuals separately. And you don't have a full public discussion, as we understand public meetings, so that there is a public interaction with regard to each other's views on a particular project. And Mr. Medina, I just went through, because of the requirement, 5 hours of training on environmental justice. And what I saw in that training, which was very valuable, by the way, with regard to public participation, is that you involve the public at every single stage of projects, and that you try to afford the public a variety of means by which they can participate and be involved, including setting up advisory citizens committees and the like. To me, these, open house style public hearings totally shortchange the public in being able to be meaningfully involved in this process. And so I guess I'm just bringing it up because maybe what this requires is a separate discussion. It's not an agenda item on our public participation plan, but I just wanted to point that out, that we were saying here, we're sitting all these meetings and they're open house style public meetings, and to my view, they do not really involve the public in a meaningful way.
Well, and thank you for those comments. What I'd like to do is back up to, I think it was in May timeframe. We went out for about 8 public meetings in our visioning meetings, and this was a very different setting. And in this case, the public was involved, actually worked to identify their needs. We had a set of maps. We had multiple stations. We had the public come in and tell us specifically what they thought were the needs, where they thought the growth was going, and where we were coming up short, and what we needed to consider as we move forward. And all of that information is available on this website. So we did an interaction with not only them, but we identified stakeholders in the region, and we brought stakeholders in and had interviews with them. Sir, by the way, your staff was here. And we did ask specifically what you think the needs are from a stakeholder's perspective and what needed to be done, and help us to identify problems. And that has already happened. That part of the process and the public involvement has helped us tremendously in identifying what we need to be looking at. At this point, what we're doing, and we're going back to identify those things that were brought to us by the public specifically, and say, here's where we're at now. Have we achieved what you've asked us to do, and what is it that we've missed? And we've got an online survey specifically set up for that exact purpose. So I understand your concern about those open house style meetings, but we did do a whole set of public involvement way prior to this. Understanding that where we're at in the plan development right now is we've already gone through the whole process of identifying where the funds are at and looking at the deficiencies where we identified through the modeling efforts that what the problems are, where the needs are, and incorporating what we heard from the public. Now we're going back out there to tell you, this is what we heard, this is where we're at. And what do we need to hear from you now? So we're doing our best to identify that, and in this case, they are open house style meetings. They are joining other meetings that are going on. The MPO has other public involvement efforts that are happening at the same time. To be clear, you're going to get a presentation here in a moment. The actual participation plan, the PPP, Public Participation Program itself is going out, and it will be at these same meetings. So those are kind of comments that we're looking for from the public to give us information moving forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and as you pointed out, I do have my staff go to these meetings, and I've gone to some of them myself, but,
Yes, sir.
but I still think that we are missing out on having the public-wide interaction at
Yes,
these
sir.
hearings to get a sense of how people's ideas are accepted or not accepted.
Understood, yes,
And
yes,
I
sir.
understand you get value out of individuals coming up to a particular station and giving you feedback, and that's what you're referring to.
Point well taken,
But
yes,
it
sir.
seems to me that if we limit it just to that and not have an open discussion with open questions, that we are missing out on a more meaningful public involvement.
Yes, sir.
That's just my view.
And I appreciate that. We are following the federal requirements. I do believe there's other things we can do in our efforts to improve public involvement above and beyond that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And
Yeah, Peter, I'm sorry, Representative Schwarzbach.
Some of the senators' points. In these meetings and how they're scheduled, when it's sort of back-to-back over a week, I've heard from constituents at a number of times that it's really hard if they're out of town, or if they're not aware, it's sort of, you have sort of one shot where if people aren't there or aren't aware of it, it's sort of missed. So I was just kind of curious. I know that it's underlined additional public meetings will be scheduled with open house style meetings. Do you have any idea of when that's anticipated, and if they're going to be spread out,
Yes, sir.
perhaps over weeks as opposed to just 1 week?
yes, sir. We're thinking about doing it over a 2-week period. It starts in the March, I think it's March 9th,
Okay.
to April 9th. And in the first 2 weeks, we're going to have meetings spread out between 7 to 8 locations.
Okay.
So that we hit, including New Mexico, all of our planning areas. We try to do the best we can to get into every area so that there's a location for everybody. And we will continue with this online effort, and we will continue with our efforts to reach out to our stakeholders, and in particular to some of those individuals that didn't have what they thought was enough time to get to our meetings in the past.
Okay. Yeah, because when it's sort of back-to-back, the comments that I'm hearing is that it feels like it's just, it's sort of perfunctory. That we're doing it because we're required to do it, and sort of nothing more. And I think that kind of speaks to what the senator is saying. I'm glad to hear that there's going to be those additional meetings over a few weeks.
Yes, sir. We tried to do it early in the process, and now it's not exactly in the middle of the process, but we wanted to get back out again now, so that if we hear something from the public that gives us more time than just waiting until the required 30-day public involvement period to address some of those issues. So we're doing our best to spread it throughout the process.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Thank you, Roger. All right.
Next, we have a
Thank you.
report on item number 8, and that's the El Paso MPO's public involvement and project call on A, the public participation plan, B, the program management plan, and C, the Federal Transit Administration 5310 program request for proposals for federal fiscal year 2017 funds for programming in fiscal year 2018.
Christina Stokes, El Paso MPO. This is really just to let you know that we do have some public involvement out right now. You should have received emails letting you know that with the link to our website. All the draft documents are there. We are also having a call request for proposals, which is really a call for projects for the FTA Section 5310 funds, which will address enhancing mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities. So the information is there, and I just wanted to read briefly what each document is. so that you will be able to provide comments, or when the public speaks to you, just have them email me with comments, because it's better to have them in writing, so that we can relay those comments back to you when we report with our draft. The public participation plan, that one outlines how we do all of our public engagement, how we hold our meetings, how we advertise to the public, and this is what you had just spoken to. So if there are comments, please do provide those to me so we can compile all the comments as we're in this 45-day public involvement. We had everything published in the paper in January 21st for all 3 of these items, and the comment period for this particular one ends on March 6th. That's the 45 days. The program management plan, that is the document that helps us to make sure that we're doing all the federal requirements in reference to the 5310 section program funds. Since we are also a direct recipient of the funds, we need to ensure that we are following the processes that FTA has set for us and the standards that we have, and to make sure that everything that we do, the tasks and everything that we've developed, is abided by. And FTA will also receive this, and I have sent a draft copy to them for their comments as well, to make sure that we are going to abide by everything that we are supposed to follow, as well as those that receive our funds. We do have, as Jay mentioned earlier, they have to have reports to the FTA. We report to the FTA as whenever funds are awarded through this grant to recipients in our region. We follow up by contacting them with the milestones that have been reached, and as the progress continues, as when they receive buses, for example, and if they've been inspected, and how the mileage is, and the continuation on the wear and tear of the vehicles as well, from beginning to end. That process is outlined in our program management plan. So the last item here is the actual request for proposals, and we do have currently an amount of $633,736 that we will need to program in fiscal year 2018, which is a short time frame to get this call out, but we're hoping that we'll have plenty of eligible applicants with good projects that we'll be able to move forward and have them programmed. And they will come before the TPB for final approval, so that we can submit them into our TIP and our MTP. So this is a different deadline. This one actually closes on March 9th. And I'm sorry, I failed to mention the program management plan is on a 30-day public review. It's a little bit different. But that comment period will end on February the 19th. So if you all have any questions, I'm here. Otherwise, everything is online. And when you have questions at that time that you're viewing them, you're welcome to contact me, and I can help with clarification of anything that you might see there. What's on the screen right now are all the scheduled meetings that we have right now for public involvement. So all this information will be available there as well, and we'll take public comment there also. And that's all I have.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments? Yep, Representative Blanco.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, the RFP closes on March 9th?
March 9th.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the public comment period closes on the 19th of February?
Not the call itself will end on March 9th, but the other 2 documents are the ones that are going through public comment. This is a separate item.
Thank you.
And I hope you all noticed that it is cooler now. We had mechanics on the roof trying to repair, and I apologize for the heat, but we were working on it in the background to try to get that fixed. Unfortunately, it was not till close to the end of the meeting, so thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the report on the Texas Freight and International Trade, Freight Mobility and Border Master Plan.
Good morning, board members. I'm Tim Wattis with TxDOT's Transportation Planning and Programming Division out of Austin, and I serve as the International Trade and Border Coordinator for TxDOT. Today, I'm going to talk about Texas Freight and International Trade and the 2 primary documents that TVP, Freight and International Trade Office, develops, and that is the Freight Mobility Plan and the Border Master Plan. Is there a clicker? Okay. So essentially, this is a dashboard related to these 2 plans. Both plans coordinate and cooperate with each other. One output from one is the input to the other, depending on where we are in the development of each plan. There are various components that input in each to the plan, but a lot of it is based on infrastructure projects, data from border wait times to congestion to traffic counts, et cetera. Also deals with reports that we're required to do either for the legislature or for Federal Highway Administration. A lot of coordination, not only within the state of Texas and Texas state agencies, local and public and private partnership, but also with our Mexican counterparts, the 4 Mexican states that border the state of Texas. And then there are various planning projects and studies underway throughout the entire development of both the Freight Mobility Plan and the Border Master Plan. And depending on where those projects and studies are, will depend on their implementation and input to either plan. And yeah, and I was just going to say, I know it's a lot of information, so if you want to interrupt me during the presentation, by all means, Senator.
Yeah, in the border plan, given that we've gotten approval for that intelligent transportation system for Zaragoza and the Bridge of the Americas, are we incorporating that funding which we're going to receive for that purpose into planning the wait times, how fast you've got in another slide, primarily, you know, how fast our traffic is in border crossings and so forth?
Yes. So any type of federal or state funding related to border activities, infrastructure, investment, one of the federal requirements is that it be included in the border master plan. If the funding has been already identified, dedicated, and authorized, then we will utilize that as a current needs investment. I'm going to talk about it a little later in the presentation, but that's going to help us set the stage to determine what the future needs are working with the local governments, and then overall identifying any necessary gaps between the overall transportation network system and port of entries and port of entry support facilities.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, and my follow-up question is on that funding. You know, it's 30 million over 10 years. So have we, or maybe Mr. Bielik is the one to ask the question, have we gotten an indication from TxDOT as to when we're going to start receiving that money so that we can start implementing the project?
We don't have any idea what that money is. We don't know what the project is.
The project?
Nobody's told us.
Really? Well, I mean, we've got in the state budget $32 million for this particular project. And it's supposed to be spread out over a 10-year period. And it's supposed to help, for the first time, introduce the intelligent transportation system concept for swifter passage of you know, the 18-wheelers from Mexico into the U.S. You've not seen anything from TxDOT yet on this?
I haven't, have you?
That's baffling to me.
Eddie Voltaire, Texas Department of Transportation. So the funds you're discussing right now are in the form of a rider. And
yes.
So, right, so they're not formally in allocations yet. So the city of Hassel is currently working on projects that they will present for this funding. They still will need to go through vetting because the way the rider was written, it needs to be vetted to see if it meets the requirements of what the rider says. So we're not to the point where the actual projects are projects. They are concepts, ideas, and that's what we have had some initial meetings and we're working with the city on that, but they're not projects yet.
And what's the time frame for completing the project proposals, submitting it to the state so that we can start implementing?
I can.
Joe was involved in
Also,
this, Chairman?
I know that the agency and also the Texas Public Finance Authority have communicated with the city of El Paso to show them, because there's some processes that the city has to follow regarding the finance authority, because this is essentially being paid for over time that's what the rider directs. It's paid over time. It's paid through the Texas Public Finance Authority. It's a mechanism that we utilized for this particular project. So I know that the agencies have communicated with the city, and they are in that initial phase. I know there was also some legal work that was being done by both TxDOT and the city of El Paso regarding the funds that were utilized in that rider.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I'd actually make a recommendation. I would suggest that you, Mr. Chairman, ask a question of TxDOT, and if the answer is not to your liking or positive, maybe to the Attorney General, I would suggest that you ask the Texas Department of Transportation if they could go forward without having to issue bonds. If we don't have to issue bonds, TxDOT could plan for this money quicker, easier, more expeditious. And I know that the writer that you were instrumental in getting in said bonds, but I think you should just ask the question. I mean, you have the authority, but the process is such that the state will scoff at doing multiple issuances unless you front load it and you have $25 million of the 32 available. Then they'd like to sell 25 million in bonds. The state probably won't sell 32 million and put it aside. So I just suggest that. I mean, it's there. The authority says 32 million for this type of project in the border, and it may be worth just clarifying whether or not TxDOT even needs to issue the bonds, because it would actually save the state money because we wouldn't have that debt, and to absorb $32 million over 10 years in a $13 billion budget is probably something that TxDOT could do.
Okay, I'll follow up with that.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. My interest is in getting it moving instead of just letting it sit there, and answering all these questions like the method of the financing. But the authority is there, as you point out. I mean, we worked to get that authorized, and so I raised the question because it seems to me to fit in the context of the border master plan.
And I would raise the dollar amount too. I would ask them what they expect the total payback of the 32 billion would be in 10 years, and if it comes back and well with the debt service it's 38 million, then I'd cut a deal and say, how about giving us 38 million instead of 32? I mean, there's some possibilities for Representative Moody here to.
Sure.
Okay. So I'm going to start off with the freight plan first. The freight plan has an approval date of 2017. It is a comprehensive multimodal plan identifying freight assets and freight corridor, the necessary policies associated to deal and address with freight, as well as challenges, strategies, and then ultimately implementation. When we were developing the freight mobility plan, 23 stakeholders and workshops was held throughout the entire state. 6 of them were held in border regions, 2 in El Paso, Laredo, and then the Rio Grande Valley. It was also inclusive of participation, both the U.S. and Mexican side. And to your knowledge, based on input we received from your participants, it helped us to identify the strengths and weaknesses, in particular at border crossings and the needed infrastructure. TxDOT, as part of the public participation involvement and our Texas Freight Advisory Committee, identified the multimodal freight network, which was one of the requirements associated with the update of the freight mobility plan. And it includes all border crossings, including commercial vehicle and rail. So this is an overall map of the TxDOT network that was inclusive during the development of the freight mobility plan. This identifies freight border crossing projects that were inclusive of not only the constrained plan effort, but the unconstrained plan as well. And then for your particular region, you see where the projects are in green for the 5-year constraint plan, and then the actual remaining 5 years from a needs assessment perspective. So overall, the freight plan identifies an investment of a little under 2,600 projects with an estimated cost of $66 billion. The plan identifies proposed projects, planning and rail projects, and then project highway needs. This chart shows what those particular projects are addressing. There are asset preservation, of course, mobility and reliability, safety, and technology. So our next steps, so our commission approved the freight mobility plan at its December meeting in 2017. Oh, I'm sorry, November of 2017. We forwarded that over to the Federal Highway Administration for their review and approval because it was a requirement under the FAST Act. All state DOTs had to go and update their freight mobility plans. So Texas met that requirement. The mobility plan has been under review by FHWA. We have received preliminary comments from them. TxDOT and its consultant staff is addressing those comments, and it's our intent to meet with FHWA and have a face-to-face to address and discuss those. So our next effort is implementation. We're going to implement a truck parking study throughout the various regions. As you know, based on federal requirements, trucks have so many hours in which they must operate, and then once they meet that threshold, they have to pull over to a location and take a certain period of rest. Well, we're going to identify where those locations are and help input some assets or infrastructure so that we can safely get them off of the network, have them park off-site, and then close in proximity so they may be able to continue on with their transportation. So it's going to do it essentially an inventory parking throughout the entire state and primarily on the freight corridors. We're going to see what the net effects are because of that hours of service regulations and then identify strategies for improvement. I would like to note that if the El Paso region or any of the local governments or partners would like TxDOT to do a study here in your region, we are open to that. We have raised that through your TPAC as well as through MPO staff. In addition, TxDOT and the Commission approved freight-centric design guidelines. As you know, as you cross through under bridges, we have various variable heights with the bridges, but now we're going to a standard 18 feet. And our designers are asked to take that into account as they go and looking at the replacement of that infrastructure. In addition, we are wanting to look at connectivity of the safety management centers so that they are able to communicate. Oh, yes, sir. Do you have a question? My apologies.
Can you do it now or at the?
Whichever.
I guess I'm kind of curious. You mentioned looking specifically at this region, that you could come out here to look at the work with the local entities. And so I guess my question on this is focusing mostly on freight and multimodal, correct?
Yes.
So I guess one of the things that makes, I think, our region unique is that when we're talking about international crossing, it's not just necessarily predicated upon freight alone. We have a tremendous amount of human capital that crosses our borders every single day. With our ports of entry, it's a need that's ongoing. It's a deep part of our history. In fact, our wonderful streetcar line that's being reintroduced that Representative Pickett is a quite big fan of, and I look forward to riding it with you, sir. It's utilizing the same streetcars that traveled 500 times a day between Juarez and El Paso. That just shows you how long there's been a need for efficient and safe border crossing. So I guess my question is in terms of looking at this comprehensive border master plan, what factors are being taken into the idea and concept of multimodal? Is it strictly how do you get an 18-wheeler and freight off of that and onto one highway or onto another highway? Is the air quality mitigation being factored into the amount of passenger cars that are idling on our ports of entry as one of the factors as well? Or is it just strictly 18-wheelers and freight?
So, and I apologize, there are two plans that we're talking about, as you saw in the original heading of the description of today's presentation and discussion, and then the dashboard itself. So this particular component talks about just strictly the freight plan, the process that TxDOT working with the local governments went in the development of the freight plan, and then what the implementation is of the freight plan. After I go through the freight plan implementation, the next effort is going to talk about the development of the Texas-Mexico Transportation Border Master Plan, and we're going to talk about in detail as to what that entails. But it is going to be a multimodal plan that is going to address pedestrian, bicycle, and as well as all modes. So we're going to be looking at rail, we're going to be looking at air freight, and et cetera. But yes, we are going to address that, and not only are we going to address it, but we're also going to address the conflicts in which each of the modes has with each other and where they have it at. Okay, so yes, sir.
Chairman, if I may. So to be clear, truck parking study, is that just the trucks that are coming across the bridge and where they park, or is that broader for any freight trucks parking anywhere?
It's going to be from a broad, holistic point of view, so that not only is our data going to capture the freight and where they are on that particular network, but we're also hoping to capture time of day, because that's going to be critical. From a capacity effort, can we be able to house that number of freight users within that facility, and then where they're going to be in proximity to the freight network. So it's going to be all of them combined.
And is it in that stage that you will take into account the environmental justice considerations that are requirements for all of these issues?
So every component, be it on the freight mobility plan implementation, such as the truck parking study or the development of the border master plan, there will be an air quality conformity effort taken into account. So NEPA is going to be one of those planning aspects that we're going to have to incorporate into the planning process, but we're also going to incorporate Title VI environmental justice aspects as well, because we want to be able to identify those neighborhoods or traffic analysis zones by regions that have been identified as Title VI EJ neighborhoods, so that when we develop our performance measures and metrics, we have an avenue to go ahead and take, here's the standard now, what is the necessary improvement, and then how can we go and address that?
Right.
So it's going to be throughout the entire process on both plans.
All right, thank you.
And then we want to be able to look at and address the need for an off-peak or 24-hour freight border crossing program. So we have high ambitions and expectations on implementation of the freight mobility plan. We are looking for partnerships with the local governments, and we look forward to working with the El Paso MPO and your local governments in any implementation efforts you see identified here. I want to note that Casey Wells out of our office is our lead freight planner, and he will be the project manager on a lot of these efforts. He was unable to join us today because he is working with FHWA to address those particular freight plan comments. Are there any other questions at this point regarding the freight mobility plan and its implementation?
Members? No.
Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next slide and address the development of the Texas-Mexico Transportation Border Master Plan. I want to note that this is a federal effort. It is federally funded on our aspect, and it's going to be a tool that's going to be utilized to prioritize and program projects along the southern border. So essentially, this is a FHWA and U.S. State Department requirement coming from the U.S.-Mexico Joint Working Committee. JWC is made up of all the Mexican states, as well as SET, SRE, and SOT from the Mexican government, and then all the U.S. states that border Mexico, and then the federal agencies on the U.S. side, that is inclusive of CBP, GSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, State Department, and others. So the previous border master plans were developed in 2012, 2013, depending on where you were in the process and where you were in the state and when approval was given by the local regional steering committees and technical advisory committees. They primarily focus on border crossings only. So they only looked at the port of entries, and then emphasis was provided to freight POEs. For your region, El Paso, Santa Teresa, and the Chihuahua Border Master Plan was developed. We also had the Laredo, North Laredo Border Master Plan, and then there was the Lower Rio Grande Valley Tamaulipas Plan. Yes, sir.
There is no border master plan for Presidio, for the Tres Pecos area?
Presidio was inclusive of the El Paso, Juarez, Santa Teresa efforts.
So it is included in the plan?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So in this particular update, we are going to have one specific deliverable for this procurement. It is one state and therefore one border. So we want to be able to address those particular efforts and issues from El Paso, Juarez, all the way to the port of Brownsville. It's going to reassess the border crossings and the various connectivities of the corridors associated with it. And it's going to be based upon those 2012, 2013 border master plans done for each of the regions. Essentially, a true needs assessment will be done for the border master plan. We're not only going to look at what the current situation is, but we're also going to look at a forecast year as well. So data, number of crossing, border wait times, land use, where the maquiladores and manufacturers are located on both sides of the border will be taken into account. One of the key components of the development of the Border Master Plan is a very proactive public involvement process. This is a binational plan. It is going to be inclusive of the local governments and both public and private partnerships. And so we want to ensure that we get the feedback from the users of the system, because TxDOT, we recognize that we're probably 1/20th of the users of the system and implementers of the system. It really is the port of entries, the bridge owners, CBP, GSA, and a whole host of others that will be implementing and utilize the system. So we want to be able to assure that we capture their particular needs and comments as we address the development of the BMP. And then there's going to be specific outcomes and expectations. We want to be able to come up with a prioritized list of projects for investment, regardless of the funding source or entity implementing that project, so that we can have a true connectivity of the entire system. So that if a port of entry is going to be doing some development or investment into their system, we want to make sure that the support facilities that's going to be serving that investment, as well as the transportation network system, that they are all in alignment with each other so we can have an efficiency and maximization of that improvement. Okay. If I'm going too fast, please let me know, Representative Pickett, because I have to say, we have done a lot of outreach in introducing the Border Master Plan. In particular, in your region, on several occasions, we have visited with the city of El Paso. On a couple of occasions, we have visited with El Paso County. And so we continue to do that outreach, and we have done it for the Lower Rio Grande Valley. I will be in Eagle Pass and Del Rio Monday and Tuesday, and then Laredo at the end of the month, and then Brownsville the 7th and 14th. So that's pretty much going to wrap up the introduction of the Border Master Plan. But when we get our consultant on board, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have their vision of what the development of the BMP will do, and then do the rounds throughout the entire region. As I noted, this builds upon the previous 3 plans. So what the data and information you have in your Border Master Plan is going to be updated to meet today's needs. It's going to utilize participant agencies. We cannot do this alone. We are asking all the local governments, and my pitch, one of them to you today, is that if you have collected traffic data, if you have done transportation studies, if it's turning movements, if you identified routes, whatever the case is, we're asking you to identify those in a master list and inventory it or house it somewhere, so when TxDOT and its consultants come and ask you for that information, we want to be able to have an immediate trigger of it so that we can then get access to it. Our intent is not to go and recreate data. Our intent is to use the data that the local governments and agencies have approved for your use. We want to make this as seamless as a process as possible. There are going to be some efforts where data will not reconcile with each other. So we're going to come back to the local governments and offer some scenarios or options for how we can go about doing that, because we want to be able to have an apple to apple comparison, so that when we develop an evaluation criteria for the prioritization of projects, all regions in the state as a whole is working off of the same basis. Is it going to be a challenge? Yes, it will be, because we're going to have data gaps, especially on the Mexican side. And so we have begun to work with our Mexican counterparts to ensure that they're up to the task or be aware of that. Our consultant working with them will help identify that. It's going to be a committee structure that's going to lead this particular effort. So the Border Master Plan, even though it is a federal requirement, that is coming out of the Border Trade Advisory Committee that is led by Secretary of State Pavlos. It is about a 32 member board. I'm going to announce who the representatives are from the El Paso region. You have John Barrera representing Borderplex Alliance, Paul Stressow with the city of El Paso, Judge Vogt from El Paso County, Michael Medina representing the El Paso NPO, and then we also have Rafael Adrete, even though he's not from the local government, he is with GTI and very knowledgeable of your region. So our initial thoughts are, and let me tell you, TxDOT does not have any preconceived ideas of the direction we want to go, but our thoughts are is that we want to build upon the regional structure that was in place during the 2012-2013 Border Master Plan, because that's where the knowledge is. And each of those committee structures had a steering committee and a technical advisory committee. What we're going to ask is that representatives who are committed to the overall process nominate representatives to this statewide policy committee and this statewide technical committee, so that your input, your information, your priorities, whatever the case may be, is transferred to the state committee. It's going to be not only inclusive of state and federal representatives, but primarily local governments. We want to ensure that users of the system, Texas Produce Association, any of the freight carriers, logistics companies, et cetera, that they are involved in the process. And we're going to rely upon the local governments, as we have begun to tell you, and the NPO, to let us get access to your public involvement database. Anybody who you have information on, we want to be able to utilize that database and send out the various notice for their involvement and inclusion in this process. So we're going to have regularly scheduled meetings. We're going to ask for feedback and guidance, and we're going to ask for your assistance in doing stakeholder outreach. In addition, you, the binational, regional, and statewide committees, you're going to lead the development of the plan, and you're also going to help us lead the implementation of the plan. Your recommendations is going to be presented to the Border Trade Advisory Committee, because they are the identified committee in the state who will make that recommendation to the Texas Transportation Commission. That's how it's established through the overall process, and that's the process we will utilize. I wanted to go and just give you a brief overview of the actual task associated with the development of the Border Master Plan. You have a secondary attachment to your presentation that is heading in Attachment C. That is the draft scope of work that talks about the actual work or inputs that are going to be developed as part of the Border Master Plan. This is a very global perspective, because we have to be able to give the consultant enough detailed information so that they understand our expectations and what is needed. So the first grouping is classified as administration and management of the plan. Task 1 will talk about project management and administration, and is going to focus on development of a schedule with identification of major milestones, as well as delivery of products. And we're going to have a big component on the quality assurance and quality control, because what's coming out of the consultants, we want to make sure is being captured as was stated in each of the regions. Stakeholder engagement plan will be actively involved and developed. We're going to have binational public involvement meetings, and they're going to have to be held in your region in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. And then it's going to be the committee structure along with the public sector agencies helping to identify those goals and objectives of the plan. We have some general concepts, which you see in front of you in the draft, but nothing in great detail. We want the committee structure to help develop that. The second component is data collection, corridor identification analysis. I've talked about this as well as addressed your comments, but it is going to be multimodal data collection. It's going to be identification from a multimodal corridor approach and designation. The needs assessment is going to help us identify where we can have the necessary improvements and investment into the overall infrastructure. And then we're going to have a forecasting of the border master plan. We just don't want to look for today, but we wanted to identify those future needs. The border master plan, its intent is to be updated every 5 years. We put 20-year as a placeholder just to note we are going to forecast, but there could be the possible alignment of MPO's metropolitan transportation plans, which may be 20, 25, or 30 years. So we just know we're going to forecast, have a forecast assessment. And then a very key component is the economic analysis of this. We want to be able to help you and help the state and help the Secretary of State tell the border region story. We want to talk about what the economic impact is of trade and good development on Mexico and the Texas border. We want to identify the economic development and powerhouse of the regions, or what it could be, and we want to identify what the economic impact is to the state and what that economic impact is to the nation. So we're going to pay a lot of attention on the economic analysis effort, and hopefully your Regional Economic Development Corporation and others can help us with that aspect. And then finally, as all TxDOT plans or even your MPO's plans, we're going to identify recommendations and an investment plan and the associated money that is either identified or earmarked now. And if there's a gap, how do we go best identify and address that gap? The implementation plan is going to be based not only on your data, but also an approved criteria that the committees will come up and agree upon, and then prioritization of those projects. And then we will have a final report, executive summary, and a brochure. So there's our contact information. I just want to tell you where we are in our procurement process and the development schedule of the border master plan. So TxDOT, through a competitive process, through our procurement and engineering professional services, put out an RFQ for development of the border master plan back in March of 2017. We did receive 4 submittals to the RFQ. Our consultant selection team, which was based on the requirements made up of TxDOT, representatives from each of the border regions, established an evaluation criteria to help not only shortlist those consultants for interviews, but also identify the consultant who's going to help us develop the plan. HDR was selected to help us develop the border master plan. Their project manager worked as an undersecretary in transportation to President Cárdenas. And so he has established relationships with SET, SRE, and SOT. I believe he was born in Nuevo Laredo, but also spent time growing up in Laredo and Monterrey. So it helped us overcome that hurdle fast. It's not an indication of why we selected them. I just wanted to give you some background information on him. We anticipate to execute the agreement no later than March. so that TxDOT can then go and issue the first notice to proceed to implement work around the April timeframe. We will then do our initial outreach in May or June, which all of you will be notified through the MPO public involvement process. The plan is going to take 18 to 24 months before it's completed, because we're doing all 1,200 plus miles of the border. However, one of the requirements from all the agencies who provided input noted that that's too long to wait for the efficiency of border infrastructure. So our thoughts were is that if we can identify some low-hanging fruit that we can therefore implement immediately with the local government's participation, we're going to do that, because we want to ensure that trade, good movement, people movement, economic development continues to occur in your respective areas. From a global approach, we're going to look at the multimodal transportation system for the port of entry and the support facilities for those port of entries. We're going to look at it from a policy, project, and program aspect. So if there's a CBP policy that is implemented in Nogales, Arizona, that we feel some minor tweaks or adjustment to the business case model can then be implemented here at any of our border regions, we're going to do that. And then any of those quick pick projects that we can go. And it's going to be from a short, medium, and long-term effort of how we'll classify all of those. So I'm going to stop there. I know it's a lot of information. It's at the end of your meeting. It's been a long morning. I think it's still morning. But have open up for any questions that you may have.
Yes, Representative Ortega.
When do you expect then that you're going to get started? If you say the contract's going to be signed come March, are we looking at a start date in April or?
So we'll do some preliminary, if we do an execution of the agreement in March as based on our schedule, we anticipate to issue that notice to proceed. A notice to proceed is essentially TxDOT's mechanism to give any of our consultants the authority to begin work. And we may issue multiple notice to proceeds. I'm thinking primarily, and I failed to mention, I'm also serving as the project manager for the development of the Border Master Plan. So I'm thinking primarily, I'm going to issue 3 notice to proceeds for tasks 1, 2, and 3, because they do work collectively with each other. May or June is when we're going to come out and hold roundtable discussions. We're going to introduce the concept. We're going to remind folks of what we did in the past and where we want to go now. So does that address the time frame you are seeking? Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Does this count toward training?
3 hours.
So good. I'll like to make a motion.
I second the motion.
I'll consider that. No, thank you. Do you have any other questions?
I just have one question.
Okay, yes, sir.
Is Mr. Juarez, is that one of the things that I had observed in the last Border Master Plan was the functionality of the federal rules and the requirements. And so I think that moving forward, this body needs to understand is that the effort that the state is doing is very good, in my opinion. And one thing that I want to make sure that the body and every other body that's going to be a functionality of developing these updates is that the nexus between the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and its associated required documents, the TIP and the conformity report, how are we addressing that in relationship to the Border Master Plan and the Freight Plan?
So, and that's a very good question. It's come up through other regions. So essentially, we're going to take your prioritized projects. We will look to the MPO to provide your most current Metropolitan Transportation Plan, your projects from the Unified Transportation Program, and then the projects that you submitted from the Transportation Improvement Program. And so those projects have already been prioritized. We're not looking to go and reprioritize. What we will be asking, though, and it's going to depend on where the projects lie, that if TxDOT El Paso, for example, has a project in 2020, that one of the bridge owners' project isn't going to be developed or open until 2021, and some other CBP GSA efforts is 2022, well, how do we align those? And so we're going to bring the partners of those projects together to say, okay, how can we maximize the full development of the investment from each of your respective agency to get full efficiency of the system? And so it's not going to be TxDOT making that decision. It won't be your regional committees or steering committees. I mean, they're going to be made aware of that because we do want to maximize the efficiency of the overall investments, everybody's investments. But it's going to be that type of discussion and that type of give and take. We don't have any preconceived ideas what that is. We're just at the initial development of this, but that helps set the framework for where we want to go and how we're going to accomplish this.
Do we have any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Appreciate your time.
Next, we have announcement item number 10, Executive Director's retirement.
Mr. Medina?
So I won the lottery, and
I heard there was a big one out there
yeah,
somewhere.
quite big. So I had communicated to the policy board through the chair my intent to retire on June 30th of this year as executive director of the NPO.
I know we'll have time to go into this when we get to June, but I definitely want to thank you for the efforts. So I was part of the ad hoc committee that interviewed candidates back when we brought you on, and so I just want to thank you. It's a lot of transformation at this policy board under your direction, and this is not an easy job that we ask you to do. I mean, there's only a few opinions at the table, so and you kind of have to navigate that and steer through that. But I know that we'll get to comments later this year, but I just wanted to say that. So thank you. Speaking of, I know we talked about training. I don't think I can count this, but I do want to let everyone know that the due date is 2 days from now, essentially, right?
January 28th.
Okay, so the sanction we have by our own rules is that you lose your voting privileges. So if you're on the exec board or you're on one of these other committees or executive committee, if you're on one of these other committees, you need to have your hours completed by, and I'm talking to myself too, I don't have mine done yet. You have to have them completed by the time you meet with your next committee. So if this is the only capacity you serve on the policy board, by the February meeting, you need to have your hours completed, or the sanction will be you lose your voting privileges until you bring those training hours up to date. If you're on exec committee, that's the same for you. And if there are any of the other committees that you're on that you serve, they have a meeting between TPAC is the other one, that it's going to meet between now and then. So please keep that in mind. And I know that Mael has sent out a link to various things you can do to complete those programs, or if you want, you can ask Bob to send you some of his hours. He's got about 147, so I think he's selling them at a pretty good rate right now.
It just went up.
Yeah, well, you should have talked to him before the meeting. Sorry, everybody. Did you have any other additions to that?
And then also just the absences.
Where are we?
So you're only allowed 3 absences.
Oh, just to reiterate the policy?
Right.
Okay, so we eliminated the idea that you could have an excused absence by permission of the board. I think the only caveat to that was for those of us in legislative session. Legislators are always very good at exempting themselves from rules.
I voted.
We did. That's true. You were on the record voting, but so there are no excused absences anymore by our own vote, by our own policy. So just keep that in mind, and they go off the fiscal year. We took training and absences and linked up. There are some questions that came up in the last couple of weeks. So just so you know, training and absences gear off the fiscal year. You have 3. There are no excuses other than those that are allowed for being in legislative session. So that is it. Just some housekeeping. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved. Second. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. It is 11:31. This meeting's adjourned.